Hey guys, it's Chag from the top development team. Today we're going to be talking about adaptations. So why do certain adaptations work while others don't? Some argue that it's the removal or addition of characters, scenes, and settings, while others may say that it's the complete reworking of existing characters and story elements. But adding, removing, or adjusting content doesn't necessarily make your adaptation any better or worse. A literal adaptation of source material that may be very accurate oftentimes won't have the same impact on film. How does a screenwriter write a great adaptation while honoring the integrity of a story? They do this by using the theme as a unifying focus for all story elements. Doing so will ensure that any changes to the source material will stay faithful to what made the original a great work of art. Now that we understand the solution, let's discuss how to use a theme to build a strong adaptation for your screenplay. And if you're interested in writing your great screenplay with the top development team, click the link below this video to work with us. As a reminder, theme is the argument that the story is making. All of your story's elements serve the theme. The theme should be expressed clearly and consistently throughout the story, and it should be tied to the character arcs of the main characters as well as the setting and genre. If you understand the thematic argument of the story you're adapting, then you can easily make the decision to add or remove scenes. This principle is true whether you're adapting a book or rewriting your own original screenplay. Let's take a look at two adaptations from similar source material, the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Rings of Power television series, and see how they compare. When looking at Tolkien's work, there's several themes that can be derived from his writings. Tolkien fortunately had over 1,000 pages to explore different themes, philosophical conflicts, and thematic arguments. Peter Jackson and his two co-writers, on the other hand, didn't have this luxury. They had to translate Tolkien's themes from book to script to film in a highly concise and efficient manner. Remember, the function of adapting is to stick with an overarching theme versus copying word for word from the source material. With that in mind, ask yourself, what is the guide that you're going to select to tell the story? Since you can't adapt everything relating back to the original story, what is the core thematic idea that you're translating to your screenplay? While working on the script for the Lord of the Rings films, Jackson covered a few different thematic arguments, such as evil can be put in check by small acts of good, not grand armies or powerful wizards, or that there's always some good worth fighting for. But for today, we'll look at how Jackson focused on Tolkien's thematic argument of having hope against all odds. Patrick McKay, a writer for the Rings of Power series, stated in an interview, "There were these huge themes about fear of death, the temptation of evil, and even friendship. I remember saying, that's the show." Although McKay addresses the multiple themes of the show, he doesn't identify a specific thematic argument, which is important in this medium of storytelling. J.D. Payne, another writer for the show, did mention in an interview that the two words he would use to describe the show are determination and hope. If we take his words and use the same thematic argument as Jackson, this gives us a foundation to explore how the choices in both Jackson's and McKay's work were either influenced or not influenced by the thematic argument. In doing so, we can judge the quality of their adaptations. Let's look at how to use a thematic argument to create characters in your screenplay. By making sure the characters you adapt into your screenplay are all built on the foundation of the thematic argument, you can make sure that every character is a necessary part of the story. And if every character is necessary, then they will be strong and memorable characters that honor the original work, even if they're changed. If we look at the thematic argument that's being made by both Tolkien and Jackson, it is whether or not one should have hope despite insurmountable odds. In a story, the thematic argument should have an opposing viewpoint to create natural conflict. This is accomplished by creating characters who believe different viewpoints about the thematic argument. In The Lord of the Rings, we can break down the thematic argument down into two different beliefs or viewpoints. 1. Have hope despite being against all odds. Or 2. Give up hope when the odds are against you. By building your characters upon this thematic argument, you're strengthening the story because every character you meet is necessary to this main idea and focus. As you can see, once they're mapped out, the characters become a lens to filter the different viewpoints of the thematic argument. The characters of Aragorn, Gandalf, Sam, and Arwen hang on to hope throughout the story despite the obstacles they come across. Gandalf comes back as Gandalf the White. He leads the men of Minas Tirith against Sauron's armies. He does this even though he knows their chances of surviving are slim.
Is there any hope, Gandalf, for Frodo and Sam?
There never was much hope.
Aragorn leads his men to the Black Gates of Mordor to give Frodo and Sam an opportunity to sneak past Sauron. He doesn't fight the battle to win, he fights it to give his friends time, but more importantly, to give them hope.
No. There's still hope for Frodo. He needs time and safe passage across the plains of Gorgoroth. We can give him that.
How?
Draw out Sauron's armies. Empty his lands. Then we gather our full strength and march on the Black Gate.
The characters of Denethor, Saruman, Boromir, and Elrond abandon hope throughout the story. Both Boromir and Elrond experience redemptive arcs, yet their character viewpoint is to abandon hope in the presence of Sauron's evil. Although Boromir experiences a redemption by protecting Merry and Pippin, he still succumbs to his core viewpoint in his dying breaths. He gives up all hope.
It is over. The world of men will fall, and all will come to darkness, and my city to ruin.
When discussing who will stand up to Sauron and defeat him, Elrond, unlike Gandalf, refuses to place his hope in men.
Men are weak.
Elrond does redeem his belief in the return of the king, and places both his trust and hope into Aragorn by reforging the shards of Narsil and giving him the blade of his forefathers. However, it's important to note where Elrond began on the diagram. The characters of Frodo, Theoden, and Faramir are essentially torn in the middle. These characters are pulled towards one viewpoint and then back to another. Frodo, being the protagonist of our story, serves as the primary perspective we use to explore this thematic argument and conflict of beliefs. He goes back and forth, just as we as the audience do the same throughout the events of the plot.
I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened.
The final scenes of the first film show this back and forth between Frodo holding on to the belief of giving up hope and returning back to having hope despite the impossible task he's been given. It is at this point, during the breaking of the Fellowship, that Frodo reconnects with his feeling of hopelessness, until he recalls Gandalf's words from Moria.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
With a renowned sense of hope, Frodo moves forward. However, he doesn't completely fall into viewpoint 1 of the thematic argument. His belief is tested by the appearance of Sam. Despite Frodo telling Sam that he's going to Mordor alone, Sam doesn't abandon his core belief of hope. He does his best to swim towards Frodo, even though he doesn't know how to, nearly drowning in the process.
I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. A promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. And I don't mean to. I don't mean to.
The act of saving Sam and bringing him along with him shifts Frodo into viewpoint 1 of the thematic argument by the end of the first film. In Jackson's adaptation, he removed characters that did not fall into this web of viewpoints. Tom Bombadil is a prime example. Tom, despite being a great character that would be beloved on the screen, did not fit the core idea, and therefore he would have diluted the film and potentially made it worse. When looking at the character web of the Rings of Power characters, there's no unifying focus between them. It's difficult to place the ensemble of characters into a viewpoint, as they're not built through a thematic argument strongly enough. As a result, the plot happens to the characters during the show versus their different viewpoints, creating the plot naturally. There's no through line that can be used to explain why the characters exist in the story, and essentially, there isn't a purpose as to why one character should get more screen time than another. If we take McKay's words and look at his show as a story of hope, then by virtue, these characters that he's created and their antagonists should easily fall into place on this diagram. An argument could be made that Halbrand and King Durin embody viewpoint 2, that is to say, that they give up hope and accept reality as it is. You could also say that Bronwyn and Nori embody viewpoint 1 of continuing to have hope despite the odds being against them. Remember, the thematic argument should have an opposing viewpoint to create natural conflict. Therefore, what's preventing these 4 characters from effortlessly falling into one side of the argument over the other is a lack of clarity around their antagonists' opposing viewpoints. Let's take a look at an example from the Rings of Power. In episode 5, Galadriel tries to convince Halbrand to return to Middle-earth and the Southlands, where her and the Númenóreans are heading. Halbrand is reluctant to leave. Galadriel then goes on to describe how she was betrayed and exiled because her fellow elves can no longer distinguish her from evil. Unlike the characters we discussed in Jackson's films, Galadriel keeps fighting not because of hope, but out of vengeance. She simply fights to get revenge for her brother's death. It's therefore difficult to place her on one side or the other of the thematic argument, thus giving less credence to Halbrand's viewpoint. His viewpoint of hopelessness is not as strong as it could be because Galadriel doesn't challenge it in any clear way. Remember, if the writers of this series describe it as a show about hope, then their characters should be able to reflect either one viewpoint or another with regard to Tolkien's thematic argument. They should either hold on to hope despite the odds or abandon it. Let's look at another example from the Rings of Power. It's difficult to determine the thematic viewpoints that the characters hold within the Harfoots and the Stranger storyline. The conflict within this storyline arises from Nori, a young Harfoot, helping an outsider, the Stranger. This goes against the Harfoot's way of life. This conflict is only ever external. It never delves into an internal nor philosophical conflict. This is because the characters in this storyline don't hold strong philosophical beliefs or viewpoints. They weren't created through the lens of Tolkien's thematic argument, being either for or against hope. Nori does exhibit some form of hope that Harfoots can be more than what they've been for thousands of years. The introduction of the Stranger character is the catalyst for this hope that she begins to foster. However, as soon as the Stranger leaves in episode 7, she resorts back to the hopelessness of the other Harfoots. Her hope was attached to an external thing, such as the character of the Stranger, rather than a personal belief. The way this character's philosophical beliefs are written are unclear. Their antagonists, the other Harfoots, like Sadoc, are also written with unclear philosophical beliefs, thus leading to a lack of strong thematic conflict in the storyline. If your characters do not fit inside the thematic argument, which is the foundational element you derive directly from the original work you're adapting, then the characters lose the integrity of the original work. Jackson's The Lord of the Rings has stronger and more entertaining characters that also maintain the integrity of the original story because the characters in his films are filtered through the lens of the thematic argument. The Rings of Power characters lack substance because it's difficult to place their beliefs up against one another, as they're not filtered through the lens of the thematic argument. Let's review what we've learned. Adding, removing, or adjusting content doesn't necessarily make your adaptation any better or worse. As a writer, you should have the creative freedom to make these decisions when adapting a story. A screenwriter writes a great adaptation while honoring the integrity of a story by using the theme as the unifying focus for all story elements. Once you've understood the thematic argument of the story that you're adapting, only then can you make decisions to add or remove scenes. What you decide to include or remove will be in line with what the unified focus of the story is. By making sure the characters you adapt into your screenplay are all built on the foundation of the thematic argument, you can make sure that every character is necessary to the story. And if you're interested in writing your great screenplay with the top development team, click the link below this video to work with us.